It was there in Prince Rupert, in front of the Tourist Bureau. It was an historical plaque. Now, I love historical plaques. They tell me that something significant happened on this spot at some previous time. My name's David Woodall with the United Church of Canada and the Emsdale Pastoral Charge. For me, I look at things differently when I have a bit of a sense of the history of a place. My favorite historical plaque is found on the back door of a restaurant in Goderich, overlooking the harbor. It is a brass plaque and it says, on this spot, in the year 1863, absolutely nothing happened. Back to Prince Rupert. It was an historical plaque highlighting ancient indigenous people's writings on the rock that I was looking at. Without the plaque to make me aware of what I was looking at, I would have never seen the writing. I would have only seen a rock. I'm always amazed at the things that I don't see, that are right in front of me. It's a curious kind of blindness. I don't know if I am so preoccupied with myself that I don't have the eyes to see, or in the case of the indigenous art that I didn't have the wisdom or the experience to understand what I was seeing. But so much passes me by without me being really aware of it. I think the same thing about our sense of the spiritual nature of life. I often think that there are voices of the Spirit that beckon us into healthy ways of living, but we often don't hear them. Maybe we are too preoccupied with ourselves, or perhaps we don't have the wisdom or the experience to understand what we're hearing or what we're seeing. Life is full of a vast range of struggling emotions, vague, unnamed sentiments, feelings of awe in the presence of beauty, anger when people get hurt or are treated poorly. We have children and we want to do what's right for them, but it's hard to put our finger on what is right for them. We find an inner revulsion at people who don't reach out and help their neighbors, even though when it's our turn to reach out and help, because the opportunity presents itself, we don't often help. There is this vast surge of feelings of right and wrong, good and bad, ideals struggling with reality. Our spirits are restless inside of us. This restlessness grows from our spirituality. We sense there's something more. We want something more. The spiritual nature of life is why spirituality, not necessarily religious dogma, but that sense of spirituality will always be part of the human experience. Because in our innermost self, we are spiritual people. We're trying to hear something we just can't explain. We're fine, but at the same time, there is this subtle, bothersome feeling that we just can't ignore. Restlessness of the spirit. It leads to growth and faith and hope. We listen for the voice of our spirit. Call it the voice of God, not because of some external philosophical argument, but because right here, inside, it makes sense. And all any religion ever does is point this out. The voice of God calling out to us. And from time to time, we actually hear that voice. Bruce Larson, who is today a well-known Christian author, speaker, and pastor, fought in the European theater during World War II. When the war was over, he stayed on in Germany as part of the Army of Occupation. Describing his life in post-war Germany, he says, "I felt that I was swimming in a sea of garbage. Worse yet, the garbage was inside me." It was in this state of mind that Bruce was standing guard one night in a bombed-out building outside of Stuttgart. He was all alone, and his thoughts turned to the state of his soul. He felt nothing but disgust for the way his spiritual life had gone downhill during his time in the army. Then Bruce did something unusual. He took his gun off his shoulder and leaned it against the brick wall. Next he put out his cigarette and knelt down. As he lifted his eyes upward, he relates how he could see millions of stars shining through the charred rafters of the bombed-out building. And with all the faith he could muster, he then prayed this prayer: Lord, if you're really there, and if you really care, come down and take over my life. It was a moment he never forgot. And I think for many of us, there is that moment when for the first time we become consciously aware of the liveliness of our spiritual life. Now, we use different words to describe it, all the way from God, Christ entering my heart, to the voice of Allah calling me to holiness, to the moment when new parents meet their child for the first time and they sense that now life has changed. During the days and weeks ahead, Bruce began to experience quiet miracles in his life. His goals and his values changed. There were new values and goals. He literally felt like a new person, and his life began to reflect the way he felt. There is this vast surge of feelings inside of us. Feelings of right and wrong, good and bad, ideals struggling with reality. Our spirits are restless, and this restlessness leads to faith. And this is why we believe, not because of some external philosophical argument, but because right here, inside, it makes sense. The voice of the Spirit calls to us, and we hear. Sam tells his story this way. You can find a version of it in the Bible. Sometimes the nights are so dark, I sleep in a little corner of the sanctuary on my blankets. When I get really scared at night, I think I'm in God's house, and so I'll be all right. Of course, I don't really believe in that stuff, but in the night, when I'm afraid, it helps me to go to sleep. In the morning, I hide my sleeping robe behind one of the partitions so it won't bother the worshipers. We don't want reality intruding into religious ritual. I'm 12 years old. My name is Sam. I've been living here in the temple as long as I can remember. Eli, he's the head priest. My job is to help him. He told me that my mother promised God that if she could become pregnant, she would give her son to the temple. Great, thanks, Mom. I miss you. What would have happened if you had a daughter? At any rate, here I am. If the truth were known, I don't really like sleeping in the sanctuary. There are noises and creaks. Usually, though, darkness creeps over me and I fall asleep. I struggle awake from sleep. Eli is calling me. I run to his room. You called me. Here I am. I didn't call you. Go back to bed. Oh man, I must have been dreaming. I hate it when I do that. It's hard to go back to sleep after I wake up in the night. There he is calling me again. What does he want? You called me and here I am. My son. He only calls me my son when he's getting upset. I didn't call you. Go back to bed. Oh man, I must be going crazy. This is weird. There he is calling me again. This time I really did hear him. You called me and here I am. But Eli said, it wasn't I. But I believe the one is calling to you who first brought you here. Go back to bed, and if he calls you again, say, speak, Lord, your servant is listening. Yeah, right. If I go to bed, I think Eli has kind of lost it. There are no mysterious voices in life. I'm sure there aren't. I'm lying in my bed. It is really quiet. Crap. I hear a voice saying my name. It is that moment that we often remember. Our spirits are restless even though we sometimes don't know it. The voice calls. We hear and realize it speaks to the very inner part of me. All the vibrancy of life unfolds before us. All the power of caring and justice and love sweeps over us. The voice of God calling, and we can say, I hear now. And the whole point of faith is that moment when we say, I hear you. I hear you. We hear you. Philip told Nathanael that he believed he had discovered the long-promised Messiah in Jesus, the man from Nazareth. Nathanael was contemptuous. There was no inkling in any way of the prophetic writings or the teaching of leaders that the long-awaited Messiah would come from Nazareth. Unbelievable. Nathanael came from a neighboring village, Cana. There is always jealousy between town and town, rivalry between village and village. And Nathanael's reaction was to declare that Nazareth was not the kind of place that anything good was likely to come out of. Philip was wise. He didn't argue. He said simply, "Come and see." Come and see. Stop and listen. Let the restlessness inside of you be a voice that you hear. I have never wanted to argue about religion or tell you that one faith is better than another. I just know from my own experience that there is more to life than we are aware of. There are no historical plaques to guide you in what you see or hear or do, but your own wisdom and your own experience will be your guide. Maybe it's in the words of a hymn, or a sermon, or a TED Talk. Maybe it's in the eyes of a hungry child. Maybe it's through the tears of bitterness we cry when we are touched by the pain of life. It may be in the depths of the forest or the quiet of the majestic grandeur of life. Or maybe that voice is in the flash of anger we feel when cruelty or injustice occur. Or maybe it's in the depths of the night when we look in on our children sleeping. Again and again that voice calls, and our spirits are restless until we hear, we see, or we understand. Listen, God is calling. God bless you. Amen.